Hello and welcome to a new episode of The Career Changers, the show that shares the most inspirational career change stories with the world. I'm your host, Elisa Martinez, and today we are going to talk about how to overcome the fear of change with Nina Grunfeld, British writer, journalist, public speaker, and entrepreneur, founder and CEO of Life Clubs and Life Clubs at Work. We will discuss an inspirational career change story, fear of change, and tools and resources to overcome it. Be sure to listen all the way through for the details. Hi, Nina, and thank you so much for joining us.
Well, a complete pleasure, and thank you for that lovely introduction. Thank you.
So, we're gonna start with the first question. Um, we had an interview where you share your experience with the career changers, and I've been collecting stories of career changes for a while. And something I notice is that there are some common stages in life for people that want to change their career. Initially, there are childhood dreams of becoming someone, followed by years in education and often traveling and learning new languages. How was this stage of your life for you, and what were your dreams when you were a child?
Gosh, it feels like a big stage from being a child to going traveling and learning languages and everything. I'm not sure I did anything quite like that, but yes. So when I was a child, to be honest, I lived really in the present. I mean, I have said that, there was one stage when I was quite small that I wanted to be a policewoman and just throw men over my shoulder. But otherwise, I mean, I don't know. I probably thought like I'd like to be a ballet dancer at some stage, but I wasn't. I don't think I really thought about life like that. I mean, my father was sort of ran his own company, and it was a steel business and mining, and not at all what I was interested in. I think I often dreamt that, it would have been wonderful if my father had run Tiffany's or something, and I could have, or Cartier, and I could have, run a jewel business. But as you can see, I have literally no jewelry, so that wouldn't have been perfect either. But I mean, I'm a great believer in thinking back to when you were a child as to the things you loved. And those things have sort of been steadfastly throughout my career, even though uh, uh, my life has sort of gone like that in terms of careers. There's always been, I mean, I've always loved photography. So that's always been a part of my life. I've loved other people, and overhearing my mother's conversations were what taught me German. She'd get on the phone. We lived in a flat. She'd get on the phone. I could hear every word, but of course, I couldn't really understand it. But that's how I learned German, was just being nosy. Um, so I loved asking people questions about themselves, as you've probably heard already. I mean, we've been bombarded with questions since we started. And yes, I suppose so. People, color. I've always loved color and coloring pencils. My favorite present when I was a child was a huge box of different colored pencils, and I kept them always very neatly in order. So I think those three things are probably people, color, and photography have run throughout my life, no matter what I've done, and still exist in life clubs.
That's great. Well, after that, there is a second stage in life that is common pretty much for everyone, and it's the time to become part of the workforce. A term that I don't find very poetic, but the luckiest may start their professional life by doing what they love the most. Others, especially nowadays, have to compromise between their ambitions and talents and the need of earning an income, and they may start a career that is not aligned with their dreams. Following your childhood and teenager years, how did you start your professional life? What was your first job, and was that aligned with your dreams and ambitions?
Gosh, well, my first job wasn't aligned with anything. I was at school, and I was actually, I kind of was quite shocked in a funny sort of way, because I was at school, and round the corner was a huge like exhibition hall, and that exhibition hall had lots of what they call silver service restaurants, and so I went to work at one, and I suppose in a way it kind of informed me. But I remember taking out a chicken salad to one of the customers, and there was mold all over the top of the chicken. And so the customer, I mean, I hadn't noticed it at the time, but the customer quite rightly said, "This chicken is off, you know." So I took it back to the kitchen. I said to the chef, "This is just really, I can't serve this to anyone." And he picked it up and rubbed it on his filthy apron and to take the mold off and then put it back on the plate. And I said, "I really can't take that out." But I suppose it made me realize how important to me, I mean, my values are things like cleanliness, you know, and honesty, and kind of service. So that was really key, I suppose, to my learning as to what I didn't want to do. But I was very lucky. My first sort of professional job was in the art department of Elektra Asylum Records in Los Angeles. And it was complete madness that I ended up there. I'd actually been on my way traveling to Mexico, and I ended up in the art department. I mean, I wanted to work in film, so from that point of view, it wasn't as good. I ended up in music, but I love music, and it was enormously good fun. Just being at the kind of center of the music business in the late 70s in LA. We had loads of concerts and free presents, and it was just a girl's dream, you know, or a boy's dream. It was just magic, really. I loved it.
So did you move there by yourself? How was that time, that experience?
Yeah, my brother was living in Cleveland, Ohio, for a few months, and so we planned to drive across America. So he'd got a car. We drove across America, and as we got to LA, I was just thrilled. I mean, I realized I am a real urban person. I mean, driving across sort of 5 days without really seeing people or buildings or anything. And I got to LA and I was like, "Oh my gosh, a traffic jam. I love this." So I decided to stay. And we also met some people and they were staying. So I hung out with them. And yeah, but I hadn't really intended to be there. My boss, the head of the art department, got me a visa, which was much easier at that time than now. But the head of the company had a PA from England, and I think he was quite ambitious. And he thought, well, he'd like someone in his team from England as well. The sort of status of the English accent at that time, I suppose it still is a bit. So that's how I ended up there. I just got my notebook and wrote down, just thinking, well, what career do I want? And I wrote down all the sort of film studios and graphic design agencies and everything in LA. And I was at an interview with this lady who was designing the Star Wars logo at the time, and she had that on her drawing board, and I just thought it was fantastic. I mean, Star Wars hadn't even come out yet. It was just before the very, very first film. And she looked at my work and said, "Oh, I know someone who'd love it." And it turned out to be her boyfriend, who was the graphic designer at Elektra Asylum, and he gave me the job. So it's weird how things work, but that's how it wasn't very planned, I don't think. It was just kind of, well, let's do this and see what happens. So that's how it was. And it was lovely. I mean, I worked in graphic design in the music business for sort of 3 years, and then I came back to England. So that was that.
So after that, you had your first career change. Not sure if it was an intentional choice or it just happened. Going from being a designer to becoming an author, writing more than 10 non-fiction audiobooks, and creating a hit TV series in the 90s, Nanny Knows Best, with your old nanny, that I find quite curious. And this had over 6 million viewers for a 6-week series on BBC One. What memories do you have of this first career change transition, and what were the challenges that you had to overcome, if any?
Oh gosh, Elisa, you asked so many questions at once. I'm just going to see what, and no wonder my answers have been so long. Um, well, I think the first one, so when I came back to England, I started a graphics company with someone from art college, and it didn't work out. And but when I was there, I'd written a little book about stain removal, and it was a project that we'd had at art college. And I thought, oh, that was actually really nice. I will try and get that published. So that's really um, how it happened. I went into a book fair, which you authors weren't meant to go to, but I've always sort of disobeyed rules, and just showed my book around, my design for this stain removal book, and met an agent, and that's how that happened. And as you say, then I wrote lots of books, and I had my first child in my early 30s, and I asked my nanny to come and stay and help me, because I had no idea. I mean, I don't know how mothers have any idea what to do with their children. My mother was really much too old, as I will be when I become a grandmother, to really remember anything. I mean, probably I wouldn't remember even if I was younger, but and so I Nanny came along, and she was amazing. I mean, she was absolutely, this is someone who's looked after children all her life, and she was fantastic. And she would just say the most obvious things. I mean, I'd put my baby down on the bed, and she'd say, no, 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 sweetie, just move him around a little bit. And then he'll be able to see the leaves, the shadow of the leaves on the ceiling. I mean, who'd have thought of that? She saw everything from the child's view, and it meant for a very calm, happy child. I mean, it was just amazing. So yeah, we got I because I'd been writing books. I sort of thought Nanny loved television. I mean, she loved. I'm more of a behind the scenes person, but she was very much, you know, there'd be a family photo and Nanny would be at the front. She loved the camera. And so I sort of thought this would make a good TV series. It'd be really helpful for people to see and hear how she thinks and how she does things. So that was strange, having to negotiate getting a TV series made, because I'd just never done anything like that. But it was, and I didn't really like doing it at all. And actually, nor did Nanny. It was very, very hard work. I mean, she was already retired, and they made no allowances for that. So she'd be filming from sort of, you know, 7 in the morning, sometimes till midnight, and then getting up again at 7. I mean, for an older person, that's really quite a lot. And I had nothing to do because my role was sort of done. I sold the series. I was kind of her chaperone, and I didn't really enjoy that much either. So, but I mean, I think definitely when you go just in terms of changes, I think the change is more how other people see you, and opening their eyes to the fact you can be different, that I found quite difficult, because I'm definitely a chameleon. And, you know, people, but going from a graphic designer to an author, you definitely step a few notches up in the ladder of people kind of going, oh my goodness, how amazing, you're an author. And then when you do a television thing, you've gone up another few notches. You're suddenly, oh my goodness, you've got a television series. And I just, and of course, being a life coach and starting life, I've gone right down. I mean, below graphic designer, and I just find it so ridiculous. I mean, I'm still exactly the same person, but I've just decided that in myself, I want to do something different. So, but I think people's expectations of you and who they feel you are and wanting to keep you in the box that they know you, I think is far more difficult for me than me wanting to change, because actually that's what I wanted to do. And so I did it.
That's so interesting. So, how did you deal with this expectation, the expectation that other people had on you at the time?
Yeah, I think probably to ignore it. I mean, sometimes I got quite hurt by it. You know, I'd sit next to someone at you know, dinner or whatever, and I could tell that actually they found you know, saying that I was a life coach was to them as difficult as if I'd said I was, you know, a full-time mother. I mean, they had nothing, they reckoned they had nothing to say to me, or nothing of interest that I could add to the conversation. So I found that quite difficult. So normally I just not really, I mean, I just kind of deflect all the questions back at them and just let them talk. And hopefully, everyone's got something really, really interesting inside them. And it's just a matter of finding it, finding that childhood passion, finding that adult obsession. And so, often end up having a fabulous conversation about butterflies or something that I know nothing about because they were interested in it rather than talking about being a life coach. Or sometimes I'd do a little experiment. I'd say, well, look, have you ever had any coaching? Would you like to see what it's like? And then I'd do a sort of 2-minute coaching session, and they'd go, oh, okay, I see. And then they'd be very embarrassed because obviously I'd revealed they'd found something, they'd had a bit of a life bulb moment, and they were like, oh, this is kind of slightly embarrassing. She already knows more about me than probably anyone at the table, including my partner. Don't know that I want to go there. So it's very, I mean, I think you have to ignore people, and if it's something you want to do, you just have to go ahead and do it.
Mm. So going back to the different stages of life that most of the career changes go through, there is the crisis moment, or maybe awakening, middle life crisis. I mean, it can be called in many ways. It's usually a time for reflection and discomfort as well. We may find that our profession or jobs are essential for our finances or to maintain our status, but we may start to feel also unfulfilled. So generally, there is a moment when there is a lot of soul searching happening. How and when did you start thinking about changing career again, and specifically about creating life clubs? And what were the challenges that you had to overcome?
Uh, um, well, the challenges for me are part of the fun, but I mean, it was definitely for me, I was menopausal. I mean, that was the last big change. I mean, I think the other changes happened probably like with most people, you're hitting 30, you're hitting 40, and hitting 50 or just before 50 was when I started life clubs. And it was very much a kind of, whoa, my brain had gone. I mean, I knew it was something I wanted to do. I've always loved helping people, loved it, loved listening to their stories. Just, yeah, I find other people fascinating. And I suppose I find myself fascinating as well. So, when I went, someone suggested ages ago that I became a life coach, and I didn't know what it was either. I'd never really thought about it. And then as a sort of friend of mine who's a psychotherapist said, well, why don't you go on this course? And it was the very first thing was a listening course. And I went on the listening course, and that was really interesting. And then she said, oh, well, why don't you go on this, on a coaching course? And this particular one she'd heard about, and CTI, who I thought were fantastic, a little bit American in places, but I thought they were great. And then just did other things to see what else was out there, read lots of coaching books. Yeah, I think it was definitely a time of my life when I was what most women will find, menopause, nothing prepares you for it. Your hormones are literally all over the place. And I just knew that I wanted to do something different. I've got 4 children, and my fourth child was just tiny. And I thought with the other 3, I'd been kind of obsessed. Books are like huge in your brain. All you can think about is your book and what goes in what chapter and how's it going to fit together. And I thought, I don't want to do that. I want to enjoy the children more. And I think knowing he was my last was a bit of a wake up call. And so I knew that I wanted to do something else. And I knew I wanted to work with people. So yeah, it didn't start off as like life clubs is it. It started off, the first thing was a sort of iteration called Chestnuts, and Chestnuts was very much like what you're doing. It was about helping people who knew they wanted something else in their career, and what was it. And then I worked the next one that I just realized that wasn't right for me at that time. The next one was one of my great friends is an astrologer, and we thought we'd put the coaching and the astrology together. But I mean, this was 15 years ago. It was like, oh my goodness, we're not just pushing one sort of boulder uphill. We're pushing two uphill at the same time. So we did a bit of that, and we got some wonderful guinea pigs who I'm forever grateful to, who we could see it was the most incredible combination, but I mean, had no idea how we were going to sell it. I mean, the people either didn't like the idea of coaching or astrology or both. And then I don't know what happened. I think I was thinking about Weight Watchers one day, and I thought I'd like to create something like Weight Watchers where people can work together in groups, and where no one's an expert, they're all helping each other. So it's a sort of shared process where, you know, I'll help you, you help me, and we'll learn and we'll grow together, both in confidence and understanding and knowledge. And that's really how Life Club started. So I wrote lots of workshops, and they've changed massively throughout the years, but I wanted one for each week of the year, so there had to be 50. And that's really how it started. And then people came and joined me, and people who became hosts of the workshops, and some were local clubs, so we did like Weight Watchers, the local club, and others were very corporate. And so we worked a lot with people living with HIV through one of our hosts, and through another person I met, we started going into corporates and working in corporates on mainly on well-being, but also on, you know, management and how to manage from a good place, how to sort of lead from a good place. I mean, we've worked in every part of an organization, and really our strap line is sort of laugh more, love more, play more, earn more. And that's what we want for people, whether they're in an organization or individuals. We want people to live a full life, to live more. So that's how we work, how it started and how we work. And sorry, I've chatted far too much now. I don't know what happened to your question, but hopefully it got answered somewhere along the way.
Yeah, no, I think that's very inspirational, and probably our listeners, they can, you know, identify themselves with the fact that sometimes success is not a straight line, but is actually the collection of different attempts. And you know, to hear your story and all the little bits that you tried here and there, and you see what is working, what is not. So that's actually what the career changes is about. And also, I think you mentioning the menopause as a stage in women's life. It's really important because nowadays we are expected to work until very late age in life. So, you know, our minds are still frame thinking that after a certain age life is over, it's done, and there are no opportunities, but actually the contrary is true, and you are the proof of that.
Well, I mean, I certainly think that for me, kind of life began at sort of, you know, in my 50s, really, I suppose, and still continues many years later. It just, you know, I was lucky. I had a fabulous husband, still have a fabulous husband, had the most gorgeous children I could ever imagine. And then, you know, it gave me the headspace and the time as they were getting older to start what I wanted and what I love. And I think it's really important that, you know, at this, I remember someone saying the third stage, well, especially a woman's life, and I'm sure it's the same with men too, but the third stage of life is very much about you and what you want. It's for you. You know, the first stage is being a child for your parents, as it were, for the, you know, entering into the world. And then the second stage is very much about bringing up a family, if that's the route you've gone by, or helping others in the corporate world, and sort of maybe forging your career. And then the third stage is for you and what you want to do with it. And I think that's fantastic. And yeah, I recommend it.
If you want to be businessy, we can say the life clubs and life clubs at work are two different entities aiming at business to consumer and business to business. Life clubs aims to improve people's lives, and life clubs at work aims to improve people's lives at work. What tools and resources are life clubs and life clubs at work offering to people and companies?
Right. Well, thank you. A nice question. We've just opened. I mean, obviously, in terms of income, if we're getting worky, in terms of income, the corporate side for us is just way bigger. And as I said before, we go in there and we run workshops where to create we want to create a community in the workplace where people feel comfortable with each other, whether online or whether face to face, doesn't really matter, but just trust each other, um, and feel sort of empowered to be themselves. So it doesn't matter how that comes across, like I said, whether management, leadership, well-being, it all leads to the same thing, which is a happy person, and an aware person, because I think it's really important, especially with mental health issues on the rise, to be aware of yourself and what your limits are, and aware of the person you're with and how they're doing at that moment in time. So that's very much what the corporate side is. And the local side, we've just opened a shop, which is very exciting. And we're stocking in our shop, well, obviously my books, which is nice. But I think we want to bring into it lots of webinars that are very much for the local environment, because the corporate has got webinars they can use on their intranet, but we want the same for people at home, to just have very affordable, very accessible webinars to just help people through whatever they're going through. And at the moment we put in it, which is how we got in touch for the second time, because you came to my club, so which is lovely. But the second time is very much around our sort of work for people who want to find a career or a career change. I mean, either they've been made redundant at the moment, which is so huge, or they're just fed up with what they're doing. And so we created very practical guides. So there's a workbook on kind of help you find your purpose and get over the shock if you've been made redundant, and it's got an audio guide with it. And then obviously we do coaching, and then as well we've got a little tiny, well, one that's free at the moment, a CV guide and a cover letter guide. But it's tiny, our shop, but it's beautiful. So I'm hoping people will go along. And so and I run monthly online clubs sort of every Tuesday near the end of the month in the evening, that people can come along to, and they're currently on Zoom, so but they wear face to face.
After after your experience as an author of how to do books, as you mentioned, now you wrote other 4 books, I think. I don't know if it's correct. 4. This time about coaching, including the Big Book of Me, the Big Book of Us, and the Life Book. Which resources would you suggest to anyone that at this moment in time is struggling to deal with change and insecurity?
Oh gosh, well, I would say the Big Book of Me is probably the simplest sort of, that it takes you on a journey and you discover yourself. So I would say that's probably the one to start with. But I would also really say, so we've kind of these guides in the shop. The one called Take Two, kind of finding your purpose. It reminded me of a kind of clapperboard. You know, you've okay, that was one bit of your life. Now the next career is take two. Let's start again. So that's a really nice process to go through, and that's on the shop. So if anyone's interested.
Thank you. In this current climate, we all have to deal with increased feeling of uncertainty. Humans tend to reject change and to be afraid when it's happening. What are the best ways to overcome the fear of change?
Oh, I think it's about building your confidence really, and doing something. I mean, I think, you know, no matter what it is, whether it's we bring ourselves down by not completing tasks. So I mean, I know that, and COVID is really, I mean, people will hopefully be watching this after COVID, but it's definitely had a kind of um, a procrastination feel for a lot of us. So I've got a sheet sitting in next to the telly that I always used to watch television and sew at the same time because I'm ridiculously practical and I hate wasting time and all that sort of business. And it's been sitting there now for months waiting for me to sew. And I've been watching television, but somehow there's something about the atmosphere that just has slowed me down. So the speed of the images, I want to look at it. I don't want to be looking at my sewing. So it's very, I think though that completing that sewing would give me a feeling of confidence, which would help me with change and help me kind of feel more empowered about knowing what I want to do and getting on with it. So I think it's about just tackling small things, doing something different every day, you know, whether it's following a different recipe, something really simple, but it gets you to realize that actually you can change. And I remember one summer just mastering doing a somersault underwater, and I'm quite kind of water shy, but it made me realize that I could still do things and do new things. And I think that's really important, just to do something new. Tiny, can be tiny.
So challenge ourselves.
Challenge ourselves. Yes, thank you.
In your experience, what are the main reasons that can hold the people back to achieve their full potential? Something that is usually related with career change.
Yeah, I think it's possibly, I mean, we go back to fear and worry and lack of confidence. But I think it can also be not being 100% sure of what you want. And as you've as you've heard, it took me literally till I was 50 to know what I wanted. And now, 15 years later, I'm still kind of coming up with what my family call distractions. So the shop, if you like, is a distraction. But I needed to do something new and I needed to do something that I wanted to do. So I think it's that, I mean, some of us just definitely find it harder to stick to something and harder to know what exactly it is we want because there are so many options out there and we don't like settling with one option. We're worried the other options are going to vanish. So for me, I've created strategies that work for me. Like I make sure I write down every idea I have so I don't lose it. I know that I can go back to it. It's still there. And but of course, you know, I don't normally. I normally think of something else, yet another thing. But I think that could be definitely a reason why people don't know what to do. It sort of holds you back. That am I going down the right? There's a sort of perfectionism. Is this really what I should be doing now? Am I going down the right track? Should I be doing something else? So I think that mixture of perfectionism, of not wanting to commit yourself, um, and of feeling worried about how you start, I would say those were the three reasons, or the three main reasons.
So we'll be talking about the different resources the Life Clubs offer. Um, what, uh, um, what support? How can Life Clubs and support our listeners that are embarking a career change process? With all the ups and downs correlated. Are there any specific resources, or they should attend the weekly meeting, monthly meetings?
Yeah, definitely. I think attend the monthly meetings is great because you definitely get the support you want there. And we also have career coaching, and that would be good for you to do as well. Plus all the other little career things. But yeah, I think just come along, join us in whatever. Maybe even just getting the bulletin is a good start, and then you'll see what we're doing. So that I'd say look at the website, put yourself down for the bulletin, get at the moment your free CV guide and come and join us.
To conclude, is there any message that you would like to share with our listeners?
Oh golly, well you put on my list of questions and I don't know if this is the next one or this one, but yeah, what kind of have you always gone by? What proverb or saying or whatever? And there's a song from my childhood or my youth, which has the line in it, if you can't be with the one you love, love the one you're with.
Oh,
And I think that probably for me is really important. And I mean, don't tell my husband, because I obviously love him and want to be with him. But I think with everything you do, just put your heart and soul into it. And if it isn't 100% right, it will be right. You'll discover more about yourself. You'll, you'll learn what you like, what you don't like. But if you're only always just dipping your toe in and feeling a bit fearful, it's not going to happen. You've got to really throw yourself into life.
And really, the last question, if you could give yourself a piece of advice, what would you say to a younger self?
Oh, probably just don't be so impatient. Yeah.
So, yeah, many times we want everything now, so that can be an issue.
Yeah, definitely. There's so many years. I mean, I feel I've got so many years left. I think we all have so much more time than we think, and we tend to, yeah, rush into things and yes, feel impatient, and don't worry, it'll be fine.
Well, thank you, Nina. It's been
Oh,
great
thank you.
having you here and to listen to your experience and your career change story.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for having me here, and it's been lovely to talk to you.
Thank you.